Afternoon, welcome to Cornell Cal Soil Health Webinar. You're able to join us today. I'm Julie Suarez. I'm Associate Dean for Land Grant Affairs within the Cornell College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. And Cornell Cal has been pleased to be a partner along with New York State for over 150 years as New York's land grant institution. So welcome today, and I'm so pleased that you could join us today. We're here today to talk about soil health. Soil health is critically important to farmers in New York State. Better soils grow better yielding crops for all of us to enjoy. Better soils are more adaptive to extremes in weather caused by climate change. And better soils, most importantly, can help sequester carbon to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. For policymakers to develop appropriate policies and researchers to develop appropriate verified technologies to sequester carbon, we have to have a good sense of where New York State soils are now and where we have the most potential to make improvements in soil health and in carbon storage. That's why I'm so pleased again to join my colleagues today in teasing out a little bit of this important work. Just a couple housekeeping rules, as I'm sure everybody's aware by this point in time, you are muted on our webinar. Please feel free to ask questions via the chat box or the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentations, we will absolutely get to everybody's questions, and we welcome your questions throughout. So I'm so pleased today to welcome three incredible people engaged in New York State policy for New York State's farm community. Commissioner Richard Ball, Assemblymember Donna Lupardo, and Senator Jen Metzger. All three of these speakers are truly dedicated to helping to lift up New York State's family farmers, ensuring that farmer voices are truly heard and are important within this wonderful food and farming debates that occur in the legislature and the executive. All three of these individuals are dedicated to helping the most pressing challenges of today in both the economic and environmental arena. And in an era in which science is increasingly politicized, I'm so very, very thankful, both personally and professionally, to share that all three of these wonderful and dedicated speakers are committed to understanding the role of science to help inform the development of factual public policy moving forward for all of the benefit of New York's residents, which is exactly why we're here today. The follow-up to a Soil Health Roundtable held by these three esteemed individuals in Albany back at the time when we could all be together in person, held by our Senate and Assembly Agriculture Committee chairs and the commissioner. So please join us in some welcoming remarks. And Commissioner Ball, we're going to start with you.
Well, thank you for the very kind words, Julie. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me here today. It's really great to be with everyone and to talk about and listen on this very important conversation, especially as we're in Climate Week. The state of New York, along with its local, federal, academic, and farm community partners, has long been advancing good management practices, best management practices actually, that reduce water pollution concerns and help our farmers adapt to a changing climate and reduce agricultural greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. Healthy soils are central to so many agriculture and environmental objectives, and I'm pretty proud to say that we have several programs that focus on improving soil health that are supported through the state's Agriculture, Environmental, or Management Planning Framework, or AIM. Our Ag Non-Point Source Abatement and Control, Ag Non-Point program, as you know it, and many watershed-based initiatives, not to mention the Climate Resilient Farming program. All these programs are based on science and research that tells our soil and water conservation technicians, extension agents, and program policymakers where we need to focus efforts to achieve the best results. Yet, with climate change at the forefront and a heightened recognition of the need to further progress on farms' conservation efforts, we still have a lot of opportunities to build on this foundation, and we're going to do more. We are working to apply additional practices and advance existing strategies to improve farm resiliency, water quality, and greenhouse gas emissions across New York State, all of which are necessary to meet the goals of the governor's pretty bold targets outlined in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA. Healthy soils are essential to increasing resiliency to extreme weather events. Healthy soils have the potential to sequester more carbon, which is vital to reducing the state's greenhouse gas emissions. And healthy soils are also central to growing good crops and healthy food, which is obviously going to support our farms and communities. The New York State Soil Health Initiative based at Cornell is a great collaborative approach to increase soil health on farms all across our state. Cornell's comprehensive assessment of soil health has been providing farmers and scientists and soil and water conservation districts and policymakers with important information on the current state of soil health, as well as a pathway forward for the years. I'm excited to hear more about this report today, understand how this work can translate into strategically focusing our resources on the types of soils, on the management strategies that are going to help our farms, our technicians, and our programs reach even higher levels of ag and environmental benefits. So great to be a part of this, great to be joined by such esteemed colleagues, and thank you.
Commissioner, thank you. And Donna, will you join us for a few words as well? And then next we'll have Senator Metzger.
Sure. Happy to. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes, we can. Having
a little technical difficulty there. So, well, thanks for having us. Really excited to hear about this research and to learn more about this very important characterization of soil health in New York State. We've been waiting for the information like this for a long time, and it will be enormously valuable. So I wanted to thank you. I'm especially interested in hearing about the new metrics established to evaluate soil health. And of course, it's music to my ears when you talk about aspirational soil health goals, because I think we all share in that. You know, legislators come to the legislature from many different professions. I came from mental health. So I'm no specialist, but I certainly am your advocate at the Capitol, working with Commissioner Ball and Senator Metzger and others, and of course CALS and so many of you who are on the call. We've been trying our best, of course, before the pandemic. We held a roundtable back in February. We gathered together everyone from farmers and soil scientists, advocates, legislators, agri-markets. And the one issue, or the one line that I took away from that moment was something that Elizabeth Henderson said. She said, we need to develop a culture of soil care. And of course, she's with NOFA, a culture of soil care. And I'm really committed to really teasing that out and understanding more. But clearly, what was missing is this important research. Of course, we've also supported initiatives that the commissioner mentioned, along with Dee Barrett's groundbreaking carbon farming pilot program down in the Hudson Valley that Senator Metzger has, of course, supported. Also, we went to bat for the creation of the Agriculture and Forestry Advisory Panel, which, again, our esteemed commissioner is heading up, and some members on the call here are part of, including Julie Suarez, Samantha Levy, and others. They're going to be considering best management practices for carbon sequestration, and we really, really want to emphasize the important role that agriculture can play in the governor's goals for the climate. And finally, and eventually, we're going to be looking at doing a comprehensive soil health legislation, acknowledging the many benefits of soil health, whether that includes incentives or standards. We're not sure yet. We're certainly looking forward to continuing this conversation to make sure that what we do is in concert with everyone's best interests and the wonderful work that you're doing. So thanks for having us. Bye.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And Senator Metzger? Oh, Senator, you're muted. I'm
sorry. My classic error is always to unmute. I just want to thank everyone for joining us on this webinar today. Thank Dr. Van Ess and Dr. Ryan and Julie and the team at Cornell CALS for this tremendously important research that's the focus of today's webinar. In addition to representing or leading the Senate Agriculture Committee, I represent the 42nd District in New York, which is a largely rural district in the Hudson Valley and Catskills with some 2,000 farms. The health of the soil is absolutely fundamental to the viability and long-term sustainability of agriculture in our state. And having solid science is essential for informing effective policy and practices, as my colleague Donna just mentioned. New York farms are predominantly small family-owned operations. They're diverse, from producing corn and grain to specialty crops, mixed vegetables, hemp, orchards, dairy, livestock. Soil health plays a crucial role in addressing many issues simultaneously: improving agricultural productivity and long-term sustainability, protecting our water resources that we all depend upon, reducing the severity of climate change, strengthening the resilience of our farms to extreme weather events that are resulting from climate change. We're so fortunate to have deep and broad expertise at Cornell Cows to build a database of knowledge that will help farmers, state legislators like myself, and the public at large in gaining the understanding we need of soil health and how we can improve it. The team of soil scientists have really produced an important piece of research characterizing soil health on farmlands and providing tools and baseline data to measure the carbon content and water holding capacity. Reducing the severity of climate change and making our farm communities more resilient to its impacts is a top priority of mine. I've been working on climate issues for some 30 years now, and I'm really committed to helping New York's farming community take advantage of new opportunities and deepen the linkages between agriculture and the environment. As my colleague just mentioned, Dee Dee Barrett has done great work, and I was happy to work with her to actually expand the Hudson Valley Carbon Farming Pilot Study, which is going to provide real-time data on how working lands can effectively sequester carbon. I've also sponsored legislation that would provide a tax credit to farmers to encourage practices that increase carbon sequestration. We're at a critical juncture in identifying avenues to address climate change. Understanding soil health and its relationship to carbon sequestration can help us develop and perfect best management strategies that support and sustain agriculture, and which can become an integral part of the solution to mitigating climate change. I look forward to today's presentation. And as Donna mentioned, we're very interested in moving legislation forward that will help support our farmers in improving soil health. And thank you so much for putting this together.
Well, again, from Commissioner, Assemblywoman, Senator, I so appreciate all of your remarks, and I can't express often enough on behalf of Cornell Cows what a privilege it is to be able to partner with you, to be able to link our scientists to help solve today's challenges. And again, from my perspective as somebody who's worked in the agricultural policy field for over 25 plus years, I probably shouldn't admit that, but we've never had quite the constellation of partners from the Commissioner to two fabulous both female chairs of our Senate and Assembly Agriculture Committees before. So really, truly appreciate your leadership, and it's an absolute pleasure. And I can't think of any other time when soil health as a topic has really resonated in policy circles, and it's really time for us all to pay attention to the critical nature of our soils for our farming systems and for the future of our planet. So again, I'm going to jump in and introduce all of our Cornell speakers. So I'm pleased to be able to introduce several colleagues of mine at Cornell Cows, including, of course, an esteemed graduate of Cornell Cows who's now farming in Western New York. I'll introduce everyone now, and then we'll jump immediately into the presentations. Dr. Harold Van Ness is a longtime faculty member within Cornell Cows School of Integrated Plant Science. He focuses on soil health, obviously, and in particular, the adoption of digital agricultural technologies. Platforms like including AdaptN, which improve environmental management and also agricultural productivity. Harold will be leading the presentation today. Emmaline Long, who has both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Cornell Cows, focusing on animal science and crop production. She's now the crop and nutrient manager for CY Farms, which is one of the premier farms out in Western New York. Dr. Matt Ryan is an associate professor in the School of Integrated Plant Sciences at Cornell Cows, and his work centers around the field of agroecology with a particular emphasis on utilizing cover crops strategically, not only to improve soil health, but also to assist farms in adapting to climate change. Joseph Amsili is an extension associate at Cornell Cows and also a graduate of Cornell Cows. I had to put that plug in. And his focus has been on extending knowledge about soil health into New York State's farm community. And with that, I'm going to ask my colleague Harold to take it away from now. And thank you again. And as a reminder, please continue to put questions in the chat box. We'll get to them in the end.
Great, thank you, Julie. I think I have control of the slides. So good afternoon, everyone. It's absolutely I'm delighted that you're all tuning in because it's a beautiful early fall day in upstate New York, and so I know what's on the other side. So also thank you, the esteemed leadership in Albany, for your comments and your recognition and continued support related to what we're doing on soil health. So my presentation will focus on the results of this characterization effort that we engaged in over the past year, and that is now available through a technical report. We also have a summary version of that available, and Joseph just posted that onto the chat box. You have to scroll up a little bit to find it, but those are now available online, and I think Julie might be following up with some emails as well. So this has been very much a team effort, and you see some of the members of that team, and I want to especially sort of acknowledge Joseph Amsili, who did a lot of the heavy lifting, and Joseph will do some more, have some more comments later on. This is the funding, of course, very important through the environmental protection funds that's managed by Ag and Markets. Also in the past, the Farm Viability Institute has always been very supportive of our innovative efforts, and we also received quite a bit of funding throughout the years from the USDA through the Sustainable Ag Program, and as well as the NRCS. So very much appreciated. Okay, so I think the importance of soil health is apparent to probably everyone, both through the pathway of agriculture and nutrition, as well as how we interact with the environment through water and air quality, and of course climate, especially. What's perhaps not quite as much recognized is that humans, through our anthropogenic activities like agriculture or urban development, we over the years, over the decades, and maybe centuries, have also influenced soil health. And I think the current interest in soil health, say the past 10 years, is really driven by that recognition of soil as a critical natural resource, like water, like air, like the biosphere, and that these anthropogenic impacts are now becoming almost as significant as sort of the natural soil variability that we experience, and you might see, say, through a soil map. A little bit of background on soil health in New York and at Cornell University, and I'll toot our horn a little bit. We really were the first university to start working on soil health at a time when there was not that much interest, and Georgia Bowie, David Wolf, and I, with Bob Schindelbeck, later joined by Aaron Risto, and now Joseph Amsili, and also Matt Ryan. We've been able to sort of keep this going and get some recognition at both the national and international level for that. One of our earlier emphases was on measuring soil health. And so we established a laboratory 14 years ago, and it really was focused on sort of the practical aspects, you know, a lab for farmers in the same philosophy as sort of traditional soil testing. So helping farmers improve the health of their land. And so we've processed a lot of samples, about 14,000 just in the past years, in the past 4 years, and a lot of the analysis that I'll present is based on that. This general framework, which we call a comprehensive assessment of soil health, is now widely recognized. And on the right here, you see the first page of what is I believe it's an 11-page report that we normally send out to the people who submit the samples. And it includes a conventional chemical analysis, which is the more established way of analyzing for nutrients and pH. And that's supplemented with 4 biological indicators that are quite new and 4 physical indicators. So it really is a sort of a comprehensive look at the soil. We also evaluate the soil in terms of its overall quality. So this analysis was focused on 1,456 samples that we received from across the state. And you can see on the map here where they came from. This was not a sort of a statistically designed, stratified random sample. It was basically based on the samples that we received for a period of several years from either individual farmers or consultants, or sometimes part of a project by maybe a conservation district or an extension office, or sometimes some other type of research project. But you can see that we have a fairly good representation of the state, especially in terms of the major agricultural regions. Oops, I skipped one. Okay, so there you go. Sorry about that. So one of the issues that we addressed was sort of, you know, what's the influence of sort of the inherent properties of the soil, mostly as a result of soil texture, whether it's, you know, say sandy or silty, loamy or clayey, and do the numbers come out differently based on soil texture. And of course, that's a property that you cannot change, and it's not influenced by management, but it in turn may influence the other indicators. So here you can see on the map the sort of the general textural groupings from different parts of the state. So in the Southeast, Long Island, Hudson Valley, we see more sandy soils. In Western New York, we have more loamy soils, loams and silt loams, typically very good soils. And then, you know, the rest of the state is kind of a little bit more diverse. So how do these soil health indicators influence the, I'm sorry, I think I skipped a slide. There we go, because I first need to indicate which soil health properties we measured. So we have 4, in addition to the chemical measurements, 4 physical, 4 biological. So we measure the ability of the soil to hold water, the stability of soil aggregates, which in a way you might think of the skeleton of the soil, very important for processes like water infiltration and reducing runoff and erosion, to get good aeration, get good root growth, and et cetera. Also, the compaction level of the soil in the surface and the subsurface, and that's the only measurement that's being made actually in the field. The rest is all done in the lab. And then we have these 4 biological indicators: the total amount of organic matter or carbon that's in the soil, and fractions of that are associated with either soil proteins. It's kind of a quality of the organic matter, similar to protein in food, for example. And it relates to organic bound nitrogen and amino acids and compounds like that. Soil respiration is the metabolic activity of the microbial community. You might think of it the exhalation of the soil. And then active carbon, which measured a fraction of the total organic matter that's biologically active, that's being decomposed and regenerated and all that. And as opposed to the total organic matter, which has a lot of relatively inert organic material. Okay, so now I already went over this. I'm sorry that I skipped that slide. So going back to the influence of texture. So on available water capacity, that's a property that is very heavily influenced by texture. So you can see if you have a very sandy soil, it has low ability to hold water because the soil has a lot of large pores. And as you increase the clay and silt content, the soil is better at holding water. So this is an inherent property that's independent of how the soil might be managed. But it's important to have this background information because we need to interpret the numbers relative to what the soil textural class is, because otherwise we're not comparing apples to apples. The other indicators, mostly the biological indicators, are also influenced by the texture class. So let's see here, organic matter. If you have a coarse, say sandy soil, you tend to have lower amounts of organic matter and you have more as you have more clay and silt in the soil. And the reason is that the organic matter binds to the mineral particles. And so if you have more of those, of course, you have more stable organic matter and stable carbon. The other biological properties basically follow the same pattern. The more clay, the higher the numbers, right? So this is not a problem. It's just that we need to recognize that there are differences. It's a little bit like measuring someone's weight. You also need to measure how tall they are, because of course taller people on the average tend to weigh more. So you need to put that in the context of some other property. So that's so what we now have is some very important information that allows us to interpret those numbers. So a second aspect that we looked at that really has never really been looked at before is what's the impact of the different cropping systems on soil health. And New York, as you know, has very diverse agriculture. And the samples that we received and analyzed had with it a crop code. And that's kind of part of standard practice. And so if the crop code was, say, corn for grain or soybean or wheat, then we knew that it was an annual grain system. So we put that in the annual grain bucket. If it said, say, corn silage or alfalfa, we knew that it was probably part of a dairy cropping system. And so we also had pastures, processed vegetables, and mixed vegetables. Now, mixed vegetables, I want to explain a little bit more. This tended to be the smaller, very diverse vegetable farms, typically organic, typically fresh market oriented, or direct to supplied to restaurants. But what sets these apart is that they're typically organic, and they typically use more sustainable practices, you might say, by bringing in compost and using aggressively using cover crops and legumes to grow their own nitrogen. So on the map, you see sort of where this diversity comes from. In the southeastern part of the state, see a lot more vegetable production, both processed and as well as these mixed vegetables. Western part of the state, of course, we have more annual grain production and dairy. North Country, of course, quite a bit of dairy as well. So we do have some geographic diversity here. So I have to explain briefly why this is significant. And so one aspect that's important is the cycling and the flows of carbon and nutrients. And these cropping systems vary a lot by that. So let me first explain sort of a natural system. So we may have a forested system, or you may have a grassland system, or you may even have a pasture system where you grow the grass and the animals eat the grass and they defecate, of course, a lot of the carbon and nutrients. In this case, most of the carbon gets recycled to the soil. Either the leaves fall onto the soil, get incorporated, or when it's grasses or alfalfa or something like that, it's the dead roots and the shoots that get recycled, or it goes to the animal and gets dropped back onto the soil as manure, but it ends up back into the soil. Now contrast that to a system, a cash crop system, where you grow, say, a wheat or corn or soybean, or maybe processed vegetables, but the majority of the carbon and nutrients gets harvested, taken off the field, and often sold off the farm. And so only a small amount, maybe only 30% or so of the crop residue gets returned to the soil. Add to that maybe problems with erosion, where you lose some of your organic matter, or you lose it through tillage, where you have some of the carbon dioxide losses. So in that case, the amount of cycling of carbon is much lower. And so in my sort of cartoonish way, I'm showing that by a lighter color, less organic matter, and a worm that's really not that happy because there's not enough energy and food, nutrients for a lot of the biological activity, as opposed to a happy worm that we have here in a more natural or pasture-based system. Now in New York, we have sort of an intermediate set of cases as well. So if you have crops that are part of a dairy farm, the crops may be removed, but a lot of the carbon and nutrients is returned as manure to the field. Many of our dairy farms also import feed, so there's additional carbon and nutrients going on to that farm. And sometimes that can create some problems on the other extreme. Mixed vegetables, like I said, a lot of times they import compost, that maybe even from urban areas, like leaf compost or something like that. And they often very aggressively use cover crops and good legume rotations because they need to grow their own nitrogen. So these are quite contrasting, and we are seeing that reflected in our soil health measurements. So here's organic matter, and we see that these the annual grain and the processing vegetables, which have very little carbon cycling, have lower organic matter contents than these other systems that have more cycling. Okay, sorry, I'm having a little bit of a problem with advancing the slides. Okay, aggregate stability. Actually, oops. It's a little slow, my apologies. And I'm going to go up a couple of slides. Yes. So aggregate stability. So again, this is sort of the skeleton of the soil. Very important physical property. We measure it by using a rainfall simulator, and we see quite a stark contrast between these annual cropping systems, certainly vis-a-vis pastures where we have a lot of carbon cycling, but we also don't have any disturbance. We don't till pastures, at least not on a regular basis. So we see the great benefits in terms of the physical structure of the soil, and the mixed vegetables and the dairy crops are in between. The other properties basically have the same results. You can see mostly separation of the annual cropping systems from these other systems. I'm going to go through it a little faster. I think it's advancing okay now. Yeah. Again, with protein, now interesting with protein is that in the mixed vegetable systems, many of these organic, because they tend to use a lot of legume cover crops and rotations, you see that benefiting the protein content of the organic matter in the soil. And soil respiration, the same picture. So we see a very consistent pattern of differences among these cropping systems. Okay, so this table basically summarizes that. And what we see, I'm sorry, the slide advance is going very slow. I need to really be patient here. So this table here basically summarizes what I just showed in the bar graphs. But what you see is this clear separation of the systems where there's very little carbon cycling, which is the processed vegetables and grain crops. On the one extreme, we have the pastures, where we have a lot of carbon cycling and no disturbance through tillage on the other, and the dairy crop and the mixed vegetables sort of in between. And so that's a really important insight. It also gives us the data to interpret any soil health sample result in terms of the context. So that got us to an opportunity with this data set to establish goals for soil health. So for, as you know, for air and for water and many other resources, we have quality standards, and but we don't have those for soils. And so soil health goals can help sort of, provide perspectives to any sample that's being analyzed and helps farmers calibrate their management, and eventually could also help, target policy efforts. And that's a discussion we would love to have. But soil health goals need to be adapted. Unlike say water quality, groundwater quality, we have a 10 milligram per liter standard for nitrate. For soil health, it needs to be adapted by region, let's say New York State or maybe the Northeast. It needs to be adapted by soil types, and it needs to be adapted by production systems, as we just illustrated. So in our report, we have a set of tables, and I'm just showing one just for the loam texture soil. We have actually 4 of these that shows what are reasonable goals, aspirational goals, that farmers could set for different cropping systems. So, you can't necessarily expect a corn and soybean wheat farmer to meet the same standard as, say, somebody working with pastures or mixed vegetables. And so we have those now for each of those indicators. The numbers don't matter that much other than that they are there. We have established them, and they're based on the 75th percentile distribution. So what this means is that of all the samples that we received, at least 25% was able to meet this standard. And so that's a reasonable standard, and it sort of allows a farmer to calibrate themselves relative to sort of peer groups in peer production environments and soil types. The other thing that we looked into, because of the interest, of course, in climate issues and carbon farming, the sequestration of carbon, of course, is one of the few opportunities for negative emissions. It basically allows us to take carbon out of the air and store it long-term in the soil. It's one of the qualities that soils have. Fortunately, that's also fully aligned with the idea of soil health. The more carbon in the soil, typically, the healthier the soil. But the soils vary in their ability to store carbon, especially as it relates to the amount of clay and silt that they have. But also the cropping systems vary in terms of where the greatest benefit might be. So we did an analysis of the soil samples, and what we measured was the amount of carbon that's in the soil and compared that to the saturation potential. So soils can hold a lot of carbon, but they do get saturated at some point in time. And so that saturation potential here is listed as 100%, which relates to what you normally can hold in a soil if it were in a grassland production system. Okay, so you might think of this sort of as a bucket of carbon that can be stored in the soil. And in the annual grain and processed vegetables, the bucket is about half full. So there is quite a bit of carbon in the soil, but you could put more carbon into the soil. For these other systems that already have more carbon, so the bucket may be already almost 3/4 full or something like that. So that means that there's less potential for additional storage and less potential to improve the soil health because it already is higher than in these other systems. So these annual grain and processed vegetable systems have the lowest carbon storage and the lowest soil health, and could in principle benefit the most in terms of improving soil health and storing carbon. Now, this is based on grasslands, and if you have an annual cropping system, we're not going to convert all of our ag land to grassland. I mean, that's not going to happen. So that's 100% is maybe a little high. It's maybe somewhere lower than that. This is just a hypothetical dashed line here that I put at 80%. But what it does show is that some cropping systems have greater opportunity to store additional carbon and improve health than other systems. So in our report, we basically say, the grain and processing vegetable systems have the greatest potential. Pastures and mixed vegetable systems have less potential for carbon sequestration because they already have a lot of carbon in the system. And the dairy crops are sort of in between. What we may want to consider from a policy perspective is, can we transfer some of this carbon from one system to another? For example, can we take some of the manure that may become excessive in a dairy on a dairy farm? Can we transfer that to another operation nearby that might benefit more from that? So that's an interesting discussion to have. So the summary points then: new insights. We understand better the inherent soil properties, impact on soil health, and also, and this is very new, we understand better how different farming system and carbon and nutrient cycling and soil disturbance, how that impacts soil health. And with that, we are able to develop some new metrics, new parameters to interpret soil health measurements, these aspirational soil health goals, and we understand more about the potential for carbon storage. And that's my last slide. I'll hand it over now to Emmaline.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emmaline Long, and I'm a crop production manager at CY Farms in Western New York. I was asked to talk today to kind of bring this whole conversation to a farm level and talk about what we're doing on our farm to improve soil health. I will say I'm a little bit biased because I actually took Professor Van Ness's soil health class at Cornell. But it was also cool to be able to do the soil health test on our farm and kind of bring, you know, the whole education full circle and down to the farm level. So I want to give you an overview of our farm because we're a little complicated. We're about 6,000 acres in 3 counties, Genesee, Orleans, and Monroe. Our average field size is about 20 acres, which is probably average for New York State, maybe a little bit bigger than Eastern New York, but when you talk to people outside of New York State, they look at that and their eyes grow very wide. But what makes us kind of unique is that we have 10 different crops and they fall into several different categories. Grains, forages, because we have a custom heifer raising operation, vegetables, mostly processing, but also some fresh market, as well as turf, which is pretty unique. There's only a couple turf farms in New York. And as you can imagine, with all of these different crops, there are endless combinations of soil types, types of tillage, rotations. So we're constantly trying to balance all of that while bringing soil health into the picture. So it can get kind of complicated. So right after I started here at CY in 2015, I was approached by the Orleans County Soil and Water. They had some funding to do the Cornell soil health test. And I said, sure, let's try it. So we picked a field, it had to be in Orleans County. And then the follow-up happened this year. And one of the things that I really liked that Assemblywoman Lupardo said a few minutes ago was creating a culture of soil care. When you talk to farmers, most of the time, they're gonna tell you the soil type and they're gonna give you those chemical characteristics. It has good pH, it has good potassium, phosphorus, and the organic matter is good. But that, as Professor Van Ness said, is only one part of the whole picture. Farmers often forget about the biological and the physical characteristics of a field. So what the soil health test allowed us to do was not just focus on those chemical characteristics that most farms already know, but it was able to bring the physical and biological into the picture, which will continue, at least on our farm, as helping to move us towards a different mindset of realizing that improving yields and improving farm profitability over time is going to come down to more than just do we have the right amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but how are other things like aggregate stability, like soil respiration, like our carbon, how are those types of things impacting our farm in the big picture? And what was really nice, Professor Van Ness showed the chart that you get that has all the different characteristics and kind of where you are on that scale. Whether it's green, you're good to go, you don't need to work on that. Yellow, this is an area for improvement. In red, you probably should look at this right away. So it allows farms to kind of separate things out because as you're creating this whole new culture of soil care, it can be kind of overwhelming to think about where do you start. So the soil health test allows farms to kind of take a step back, start with a list of maybe the worst things, and it gives you the opportunity to improve on those and start taking steps in the right direction. So some of the things that we were able to do was start to focus more on our physical characteristics over just the chemical. We were able to start looking at how in our rotation can we start to incorporate less tillage. One of the things that I am constantly telling the other managers on our farm is I would love to till less. And so showing them that, you know what, our physical characteristics are not that great. How can we look at our rotation because it is so diverse and we have a lot of opportunity to change it? How can we change it to incorporate less tillage? And then we've also been focusing a lot more in the last couple of years on cover crops. The best place to start is often with single species. So we've increased the amount of red clover that we've had. We have some triticale, and those we used as forages for our heifer operation. But on this particular field, we actually, the same year that we got our report back, we put in some tillage radishes to try to increase the aggregate stability, increase carbon in the soil, all the great things that tillage radishes are known to do for the soil. But this year we've had the opportunity, just because of some changes in our operation, to play around with some multi-species and multi-purpose cover crops. So this is pictured as me with one of the owners of the farm, Christian Juncker, in one of our multi-species cover crops fields. And I think we did several hundred acres of that this summer, and the results so far have been really good. People like seeing the green on the field. One of the big blocks is actually next to a campground, a seasonal campground, so people love the sunflowers in the campground. But also it's just really impressive when you walk out there. So I'm hoping that we can continue to do that and increase the number of species that we're growing with regards to cover crops, increase the acreage that we're growing, continue to look at tillage, and refine our rotations in a way that is able to continue to build soil health. Coming from a farm perspective, it's really easy to not put soil health first, especially when you're dealing with things like the weather and markets and millions of other things that you're looking at in trying to make decisions on with a farm. But the Cornell Soil Health Test, because it is so straightforward, because there are just very distinct things to look at, and you're given a very obvious score with a direction to improve, I think it's a really good way to continue to create, as Assemblymember Lupardo said, that culture of soil health. That's going to be much more important in the coming decade. So thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Ryan. I'm going to be telling you about some of the research projects that we are doing with the New York Soil Health Program. I don't think I have the capacity to change the slides, Joseph. So, oh, now I see. Excellent. So, like I said, Matthew Ryan. I'm an associate professor in soil and crop sciences. And what we do here is we really test management practices and strategies and develop solutions to improve soil health, build resilience to climate change, all while trying to maintain or improve farm profitability. Most of our work is focused on cover crops and reducing tillage. And what we're trying to do is avoid situations like you see on the right, where we received about 2 inches of rain in an hour right after soybean planting. And we had a lot of soil washing. These types of events where we have extreme rainfall over a short period of time are increasing over time, and we've seen an increase over the past 50 years if you look at the data. And we're replacing these bare soil systems with systems that utilize cover crops and reduce tillage practices. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of the projects that we're doing here with the New York Soil Health Program and give you a sense for some of our work. So what you're looking at here is a multi-species mixture of cover crops that were interseeded between rows of corn. And when we talk with farmers about cover crops, so there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest, but we're still not seeing the adoption levels that we would like to see. Right now, based on the latest Ag Census, we're looking at about 37% of corn and soybean acreage in New York State is cover cropped. And when we talk with farmers about some of the constraints that they have with cover crops, we see that there's just not a whole lot of time to get cover crops established after corn grain especially is harvested in the fall. But even with corn silage, you're limited in the types of cover crops that you can grow. Typically, you're limited to cereal rye. That's one of the most winter hardy cover crops. And what we're trying to do is look at cover crop interseeding, where we establish our cover crops before the corn is harvested or before the soybean is harvested. And this allows us to grow different cover crop species, and we can get actually legume cover crops into the rotation this way. And legumes can be very beneficial, and they can provide nitrogen and reduce fertilizer expenses in the next year. some of the challenges with the system that we're trying to work through is developing herbicide programs that will allow weeds to be suppressed, but cover crops to grow. And that sounds straightforward, but it can be a little tricky. And so we're working very closely with the agronomists here and weed scientists, both in New York State and beyond, and really trying to come up with solutions that work for farmers in our region. Cover crop mixtures with this interseeding system have been implemented in a long-term experiment at one of our research farms. This long-term experiment that I'll be talking about was established in 1992 by Bob Schindelbeck and Harold Van Ness, and this compared different treatments, different tillage practices, and what we did was we incorporated interseeded cover crops into the moldboard plow tillage treatment and also into the no-till treatment. And you can see after a very short period of time, 4 years basically, where we were interseeding the cover crops, we can see some changes and some differences between the plots that had cover crops and those that did not. What's really exciting about this is that there seems to be an additive effect when we combine both cover cropping with no-till, and we see a dramatic increase in soil organic matter here with that combination of those practices, and also an increase in that infiltration rate. The infiltration rate is really important, again, for those extreme weather events where we're having a lot of rain come down over a very short period of time, and we want that water to go into the soil and not run off. I also wanted to tell you about some cover crop practices, this type of strategy that we're using where we're rolling down and mechanically terminating cover crops prior to no-till planting soybean and other crops. This is a picture. These are actually organic soybean that were planted into rolled cereal rye. And with organic farms, New York State is a leader with organic crop production, and so we want to support those farmers. We also see that this system is very valuable in helping non-organic farmers manage herbicide-resistant weeds, which have been increasing in New York State. So when we're looking at strategies, we're trying to take a cropping system approach and look for solutions that will address multiple problems. And certainly with the herbicide-resistant weed problem, if we can find a solution that will not only build soil health, maintain profitability, but also work with reducing herbicide-resistant weeds, we feel like we're on the right track. This is a slide from a virtual field day that we did over the summer. Again, with the pandemic, we had to shift our approach, and we would normally have a nice field day out at the research farm and have 100+ people come out. But instead, we did a virtual field day, and so we collected some videos and photographs. And what I'm showing you here is a comparison of different planting depths. Part of this system is getting the proper equipment and management approach down. So what we were able to do with some funding from New York State is to purchase a new no-till planter, and that's been very helpful and effective in trying to understand what works and what does not. And what you're looking at here on the left is a shallow planted soybean crop, and compared to one that is planted at adequate soil depth. Planting depth, it may sound extremely basic and straightforward, but it's critical, especially in a situation like this where we're rolling down a rye cover crop and really relying on that mulch to suppress weeds. And here, getting that proper seed to soil contact and seed placement at the proper depth is really critical for not only getting good growth, but also suppressing weeds, because some of the weed suppression is actually coming from the soybean crop itself in its competition and shading of the weeds. So there's a video that's available. If you have time, I encourage you to check out the video. These slides will be available after the webinar. It goes through all of the different planter components that we're using, and tells you about this trial of looking at different planting depths. Something new that we're just trying to do is expand the range of crops that we can grow with this rolled down cover crop approach and using no-till practices. And so in the past, we've looked at rolling down cover crops and no-till planting soybean, and that has worked quite well. We see that we can get comparable yields under most years. We also have tried corn. Corn is a little bit more tricky, but what you're looking at here is no-till drilling wheat into rolled sorghum Sudan grass. We were very surprised and impressed excuse me, with the results from this trial. It's something that we really have not seen before. Sometimes we do work and it starts in other places. We bring it to New York and evaluate it here. This is something that I don't think anyone else has tried yet, and we think that there's a lot of potential. With our no-till wheat, our yields were quite good this year, and we did not see any yield drag in this rolled cover crop system. And we think that there are quite substantial soil health benefits from growing a big cover crop like this and maintaining that mulch on the soil surface and then getting a nice crop afterwards. So something new and up and coming. Again, with this approach, we think that we can get a little bit closer towards a continuous organic no-till system. So something that is a bit aspirational, but something certainly worth working on. Did have one additional slide here, or maybe two. In addition to field research, we also work with farmers, and this is some data that I'm showing you from a graduate student who conducted a farmer survey that was focused on cover crop incentive programs. And this was not limited to New York, but we surveyed farmers in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and in Vermont as well. And you can see here in the table, these are the acreage of cover crop, average acreage of cover crop before participating in a cover crop incentive program where farmers are paid or the costs are shared. And then during the program, and you can see the average percent increase in program participation. So New York, we're right at 53%. In addition to just looking at basically the return on investment with cover crop incentive programs, we're also identifying different aspects of the program that farmers really like and ways to improve cover crop incentive programs. And again, this is a multi-state initiative working with people from Maryland up into Vermont. My last slide here, I just wanted to share, I'm showing you a perennial grain in the background, and this is kind of our long shot, big picture thinking strategy with perennial grains. It's not quite ready for farmer adoption, but very exciting to be able to plant a grain crop, and harvest it for multiple years in a row. And part of what we're trying to do, of course, all the time is bring students together with farmers so that we can learn and help solve these problems together. So just an example of some graduate students working with farmers. This is our farmer advisory board, and we would go out to the research farm, get together and talk through some of the issues that we're dealing with and really put our heads together. And I feel like this is in spirit of what we try to do at Cornell, bring people together and work through some issues and work through problems and develop solutions. So with that, I'll stop. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to Joseph Amsili, and he's going to talk about outreach.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm going to go pretty quick since we're almost at the end of the hour, but I have the privilege to work on a lot of extension activities with New York Soil Health across the state. And a quick plug, if you're not subscribed to the New York Soil Health listserv, I encourage you to do that to get the latest in New York Soil Health news, events, resources, and research. One thing that we've had a lot of fun doing is working as part of this really big New York Soil Health working group that we've been helping to coordinate in this role, which is really, you can see from all the logos represented here, really represents great diversity of organizations, agencies, and industry with leaders that are all really geared towards soil health. So it's a really great, in the spirit of collaboration, to work on these things and have biannual meetings. And one of the big things we do every year is to have this big soil health center at Empire Farm Days. Unfortunately, this year had to be virtual, but as you can see, we had a really nice agenda still. One thing that's been also a lot of fun to work on is this New York State Soil Health Specialist Training. One thing we're excited to do is extend this. The original cohort went from 2018 to 2020, and now we're going to be having a new cohort of ag professionals from across the state start on October 22nd. So that's exciting. And we also, in addition to the soil health, New York Soil Health Report, we also do a lot of, produce a lot of educational resources, which are available on the website. So definitely check that out.
Great, Joseph. Thanks so much. I really appreciate everybody's time today and thoughtful presentations.